Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is JTO, The Search for the Philosopher's Stone. In audio form, check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 5. After School in Music Room 3. Hey there, Pipsqueak. The twins chorused, grinning as Ed, Al, and Tamaki entered the room. Don't call me a bean, Ed yelled, stomping his foot in agitation. Twins, knock it off, Tamaki said as he started to help set things up for the meeting that day. Eddie-chan, Ali-chan, are you gonna stay for the meeting today? Honey asked, skipping up to them. As the school day had gone on, most of the hosts had warmed up to the brothers, once they'd realized that Tamaki was perfectly fine after letting them stay at his house for the night. The only one that still seemed wary of the brothers was Kyoya, but Tamaki had assured them that Kyoya just hadn't had time to really get to know them yet. Yeah, Tamaki said we could hang out and see what exactly it is that you guys do around here, Ed replied in answer to Honey's question. Yay! Honey exclaimed, smiling. You can eat some cake with me? Ed grinned and shook his head, wondering how this kid could actually be 17 years old. All right, places people, Tamaki called from the doorway, his hand resting on the brass door handle. All of the hosts quickly scrambled to gather around the couch in the center of the room, leaving Ed and Al standing alone. What exactly are we supposed to do? Ed asked. Oh, you two can just stay there, we'll introduce you to our guests. Tamaki grinned. Oh no, that's okay Al started to say, but he was cut off as Tamaki opened the doors and a group of girls streamed into the room. Welcome, ladies, the hosts chorused as the girls crowded around them. Some of them noticed Ed and Al and cast a few curious glances their way. We're so glad you lovely ladies could join us this afternoon, Tamaki said, striding over to the brothers. But before we start the meeting, I'd like to introduce you to some new students. This is Edward Elric and his brother, Alphonse. Hi, Ed said awkwardly as all of the ladies' gazes turned to him and his brother. There was a pause, and then all of the girls started talking at once. It was hard to discern exactly what each one was saying, but Ed managed to pick out a particularly loud squeal coming from a girl to his right. Oh, that little blonde is so cute, she exclaimed, and her friend nodded in agreement. Ed let out a little growl of annoyance and turned to her. Who are you, Callan, so small that when he goes to the store he has to stand on Al's shoulders just to see over the checkout counter? He yelled, startling everyone but his brother, who just sighed wearily. There was another silent pause, and then all the girls squealed at once. He's so adorable. Hey! As Ed freaked out again and most of the girls continued to fawn over him, some of the ladies turned their attention to Al. Alphonse, if you don't mind my asking, how much older are you than Ed? One of them asked, distracting Al from watching his brother's rant. Actually, I'm a year younger, Al replied. The girls frowned in confusion. Really? Another one questioned. But he's so much less mature? I know, but I've learned to deal with it, after all, he is my brother. Ah. The girls cooed. How sweet. Are you all discussing brotherly love? Said two identical voices. The twins appeared next to Alphonse, their arms draped around each other. Ah yes, nothing can beat the love between an older and a younger brother, Hikaru commented. Suddenly, Keiru's expression turned almost pained and he stepped away from his twin, who looked at him questioningly. Hikaru, Keiru said softly, glancing at his brother shyly. Do you ever wish that I wasn't your twin, but just a younger brother instead? Of course not, Keiru, Hikaru exclaimed, throwing his arms around Keiru's shoulders. Keiru looked away, but Hikaru grabbed his chin and pulled Keiru's face close to his dramatically. You know I'd never want you to be anything less than my twin. Hikaru, Keiru cried, gripping Hikaru's shirt, and Al could swear he saw tears in his eyes. What are you two doing? Edward said, having escaped the mass of girls surrounding him and noticing the twins' encounter. It's called brotherly love, if you must know, Hikaru snapped, and Keiru clung to him tighter. Ed and Al shared a very weirded out glance. All right, well, would you knock it off? It's kind of disturbing, Ed said. All of the ladies let out a gasp of surprise at how brazen Ed was being. The twins narrowed their eyes. "We're the little devil type, it comes with the package," they said. As Ed started to retort, the door to the club room opened and everyone turned as Krona shuffled into the room. I'm sorry I'm late. I was my. He trailed off when he realized that not only was the host club there, a huge group of girls, plus Ed and Al, were staring at him as well. That's a lot of people. Krona muttered to himself, frozen in place. I really don't know how to deal with this. Krona, I'm so glad you made it. Tamaki beamed, practically skipping over to him. He put an arm around Krona's shoulders, and Krona made a little squeaking sound and jerked away from his grasp. Oops, sorry. Tamaki apologized, remembering how shy Krona was. He smiled again and turned to the group, who by now had completely forgotten the argument between Ed and the twins. Ladies, I'd like you to meet another friend of mine, this is Krona, Tamaki announced. The girls stared at Krona, and Ed thought that they looked almost like a pack of lions about to pounce. Sure enough, they suddenly started to rush forward. Whoa, wait. Tamaki exclaimed, stepping in front of Krona protectively as the pink-haired boy backed up against the door, his set eyes wide with terror. Please don't crowd around him, he's extremely shy. The girls slowed down and eventually stopped, looking at Krona like he was the strangest yet most interesting thing they'd seen all day. Kyo walked over to stand in front of Tamaki, smiling sweetly. Ladies, I know you are all eager to chat without new guests, but we really must start the meeting before it gets too late, he said. However, Ed, Al, and Krona will be walking around and sitting with each host for a time, so you'll still get the chance to speak with them, okay? The girls nodded. Alright, then let's start, hosts, please go to your tables. The ladies and all of the hosts except Tamaki dispersed to go to their designated tables. Honey grabbed Ed and Al's hands and tugged them over to his spot, which was laden with cakes and other sweets. Tamaki told his guests that he would be at his table in a moment, and then he turned to Krona. Sorry about that, the ladies can get a little too excited sometimes, he said, smiling apologetically. Krona just stared at him, seeming to still be in shock at nearly getting swarmed by a mob of girls. Are you all right? Tamaki asked, looking into his eyes. Krona nodded and averted his gaze to the floor, gripping his arm. Thanks for not letting them surround me, Krona said quietly, glancing at the blonde. Oh, it was nothing, I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. You are my friend, after all. Krona frowned at him, confused. I am. He asked, and Tamaki grinned. Of course you are. Don't you think so? Oh, yeah. I guess I am. Krona smiled weakly and Tamaki beamed again, happy to get at least a slightly positive response out of him. The host king held out his hand to Krona. Do you want to stay at my table with me for a little bit? He asked, and Krona nodded shyly again. Ever so slowly, he took Tamaki's hand in his own and allowed the blonde to lead him over to a set of couches where 6 ladies were sitting, waiting. Krona and Tamaki sat down, and then Tamaki commenced his hosting. The rest of the meeting passed by without any more major incidents, except for Ed and Al continuing to be weirded out by Hikaru and Keiru's twincest act. Krona didn't talk much, but Tamaki considered the fact that he didn't bolt for the doors when all of the ladies started cooing over him at once an accomplishment in itself. After the meeting had ended and all of the ladies had left, the hosts cleaned up the room and then started to go their separate ways. Krona noticed Ed and Al exiting the room with Tamaki and he ran to catch up with them, remembering Medusa's orders from earlier about trying to make friends with them. Wait. Krona called, and the trio paused so he could catch up with them. Krona gripped his arm as they all stared at him questioningly. Can I walk with you? Of course, Krona. Tamaki grinned. Thanks. So, Krona, you just transferred here, too? Al asked as Krona fell into step with the trio. Krona replied. He glanced at Al and immediately started to stare at him with fascination, much as he had done the day before when he'd first encountered the brothers after school. Is my brother really that interesting? Ed questioned, noticing how Al had started to shift uncomfortably from the intensity of Krona's gaze. Krona immediately looked at the floor. Oh, no. Sorry. Hey! Stop acting like a weirdo! Ragnarok suddenly exclaimed in the back of Krona's mind, making the boy wince. They're never gonna try and be your friends if you keep acting like some creepy kid. But Al's soul wavelength is so strong. It's not normal. Krona said quietly so the others couldn't hear. Ragnarok laughed loudly, and Ed raised his eyebrow as he saw Krona flinch again. You're worried about someone not being normal. The demon sword said derisively. You're not exactly a prime example of normal yourself. Well, no, but dash. Krona, are you okay? Do you want to tell us something? Tamaki asked when he saw Krona muttering to himself. Krona's mouth snapped shut and he shook his head, gripping his arm. There was a moment of silence and Tamaki looked at Krona anxiously, not really believing that he was as alright as he claimed to be. After a few seconds, Ed yawned and stretched his arms into the air. Krona and Tamaki's heads turned when they heard the chink of metal, and Ed quickly put his arms down. Heh, my joints must really be stiff, Ed laughed nervously, massaging his shoulder. I should work out some more. Anyway, so Tamaki, that's some club you run back there. Oh, did you enjoy it? Tamaki beamed enthusiastically. I'm so glad. Yes, making young ladies happy just gives you a good feeling inside, doesn't it? The group continued talking about the host club until they got outside. Tamaki actually managed to get Krona involved in the conversation at one point, and despite his nagging feeling of nervousness and worry, Krona was starting to get a little more used to being around Tamaki and the brothers. He and the trio parted ways at the entrance to the school and set off to the places they were staying, already anxious for the next day of school to begin. Chapter 6. 1 week later. Come on, Al, take off the armor. I really don't want to. But we want to see what you look like, Ali-chan. Al looked around nervously. He was currently backed up against the wall of the clubroom, surrounded by Hikaru, Kaoru, and Honey. It was after club hours, and the hosts had been bugging Al ever since the girls had left about taking off his armor so they could see what he looked like. Of course, Al couldn't show them his real body, since it wasn't even there, but there was no way to tell them that without revealing what had happened to him all those years ago. As the week had gone on, Ed, Al, and Krona had adjusted to the school pretty well. Krona had gotten a little closer to Tamaki in regards to becoming friends, but he was still having trouble connecting with Ed and Al, much to the disappointment of Medusa. The brothers, meanwhile, had gotten used to living at Suo Mansion No. 2, they enjoyed living the good life, even though they still hadn't found the clue to the Philosopher's Stone they were looking for, or a way to get back home. The host club had also adjusted to having 3 new members. The boys weren't official hosts yet, but they still talked with the ladies just as the real hosts were doing, and some girls were even starting to request them specifically. Ed and Al had already been designated their own table. Krona had been offered one as well, but he chose to stick by either Tamaki or Haruhi, who he felt surprisingly calm around, which he guessed was caused by his. Neither the brothers or Krona had realized that Haruhi was a girl yet, reassuring nature and Krona only occasionally sat with the other hosts. Anyway, the latest thing to get everyone abuzz was the fact that Alphonse Elric never took off the strange armor he was wearing. Everyone had secretly wondered why he always wore it, but the topic was formally brought up when Krona, Ed, and Al got their school uniforms and Al had refused to wear his. Hey, quit bugging my brother, will you? Ed barked, returning to the room from helping Krona get a new uniform. The previous one had been too short for Krona's lean physique. Krona drifted into the room after Ed, self-consciously tugging on the sleeves of his sky-blue jacket. Brother! I'm glad you're back! Al exclaimed, relieved. He managed to get away from the wall while the hosts were temporarily distracted. When they realized he had escaped, the twins clucked their tongues and threw up their hands. Well, if he won't take it off willingly. Hikaru said, grinning devilishly and linking arms with his brother. We'll just have to find some other way to see what's inside that armor, Kaoru finished, grinning as well. They laughed and walked off towards the closet that housed the cleaning supplies and Al stared after them, looking frightened. Oh, don't let them bother you, Tamaki said, patting Al on the shoulder. They just like to get people riled up for no reason. Hey, don't stick your tongues out at me. Tamaki exclaimed when the twins made a face at him. Tamaki whipped around to Kyoya. Mother, our children are being rebellious. What? Ed exclaimed, not having a clue as to what Tamaki was yelling about. Krona also seemed to be giving Tamaki an odd stare, and he took a slight step away from the host king. Said blonde immediately looked heartbroken and rushed over to crouch in a corner. Wah, and now even Krona's getting scared of me, he cried. Krona looked startled. He started to take a step towards Tamaki, but then he paused, not quite sure what to do. Just leave him, Harui said, coming up behind Krona and startling him. He does this a lot. Give him a few minutes and he'll be perfectly fine. Oh, okay. Krona muttered, averting his gaze to the floor. Harui cautiously put a hand on his shoulder and Krona flinched, but amazingly didn't try to push her away. Harui smiled slightly, glad that Krona was getting at least a little better at being with other people. All of a sudden, there was a clanging sound, like hollow metal striking something, and everyone turned in the direction of Alphonse. Oops, oh my god. The twins screamed, and the rest of the hosts took up a similar cry as well when they saw that Al's armor head had been knocked off, but there was nothing inside. Then, there was chaos. The twins, who had accidentally knocked off Al's head with a broom as they were cleaning, threw the brooms at him and ran to the other side of the room, where they huddled together, staring at the blackness inside the armor. Honey hid behind Mori, who quickly picked up his cousin and rushed over to the wall where the twins were. Kyoya and Harui just stood there with their mouths open, and Tamaki and Ed frantically tried to put Al's head back on, which was currently rolling towards the other side of the room. Krona finally realized why Al's soul wavelength was so strong. It was because the boy was nothing but a soul. Amidst all of the chaos, Krona was able to get a faint glimpse of the glowing orb floating around inside the center of the armor. However, he noticed that the little wispy tail end of the soul seemed to be attached to a blood-red mark on the back of Al's armor. He frowned and made a mental note to possibly try and ask Medusa about it later. After a few minutes, Ed and Tamaki were successfully able to reattach Al's head. Tamaki attempted to get everyone's attention, but they were too worked up to listen to him. After a few unsuccessful tries, Ed had had enough. He tapped his brother on the arm and Al helped lift Ed onto his shoulders. Shut up! Ed yelled, and then there was complete silence. Thank you. Now, I know dash. See, I warned you, Tamaki. Kyoya exclaimed, cutting Ed off and pulling Tamaki away from the brothers. Didn't I tell you that those two were bad news? And now look, one of them has no body. I knew alchemy was just a code word for some type of dark magic thing. Yeah, Tama-chan, we warned you. Honey piped up from atop Mori's shoulders. Hey, don't cut me off when I'm talking. Ed yelled, and the clamor that had begun to start immediately ceased. Listen, I know this looks bad, but it's really not. Okay, well, actually, it is a little bad, seeing as how Al has no body and all. But that doesn't mean he's dangerous. We've been hanging out with you guys for what, a whole week? And had Al ever laid a hand on anyone? No. He's perfectly harmless. But he has no body. The twins exclaimed, and the clamor started up again. Everyone, please. Tamaki said, and the noise once again petered down. These two have been staying at my mansion for the past week, and I know that Alphonse wouldn't hurt a fly. There is a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why Alphonse is like this, which I'm sure the brothers would have no problem explaining to you, seeing as how we ended up in this situation dash. But Tamaki, you don't understand, Harui said. Al has no body. How is he alive and walking around? There's nothing inside. His soul is in there. Ed said, gesturing to his brother. That's how he's still alive. But how is that possible? Kyoya asked. His soul is attached to the armor, Krona said quietly. He gulped and looked at the ground when everyone turned their gazes on him. I mean, couldn't you see it? It was connected to that red mark on the back of where his neck is supposed to be. Everyone just stared at him, and Ed frowned in confusion. Al, do you mind? Ed asked, grasping the strings that came out of the top of Al's armored head. No, go ahead, Al sighed. Sorry about this, Ed said apologetically, tugging Al's head off. Everyone stared into the armor, but all they could see was darkness. They noticed the blood seal that Ed had drawn all those years ago, but they couldn't see the supposed soul that Krona had claimed was attached to it. "What do you mean his soul is attached to the armor?" Kyoya asked. "I can't see anything." "Can't you?" Krona questioned, frowning slightly. "It's right there, that glowing orb in the middle, that's his soul." "Oh no." Suddenly, Krona realized that he was the only person who was able to actually see Alphonse's soul. Medusa had mentioned that he was the only one who could see the glowing orbs, but he had completely forgotten. "Wait, you mean you can actually see Al's soul?" Ed exclaimed, staring at Krona with complete fascination. Krona started to back up towards the door, knowing that Ed was going to suddenly realize his plan, and then everything would be ruined. "That's amazing." "Huh?" Krona paused, his eyes wide with confusion and terror. Ed was smiling at him like Krona was the most wonderful person on the planet. What? "Wow, what a lucky break," Ragnarok said suddenly in the back of Krona's mind. "That stupid kid actually seems impressed by you. We can definitely use this to our advantage." Yeah, I guess so," Krona agreed meekly. Ed hopped off of his brother's shoulders and started to walk over to Krona. "So how do you do it? What does a soul look like?" he asked. Wait, hold on," Kyoya exclaimed. "You still haven't explained how an empty suit of armor is able to walk and talk on its own." He gestured to Al, who was currently fitting his head back into place. "Oh, right," Ed said. And with that he launched into the story he had told Tamaki a week ago, about how he and Al had tried to bring their mother back from the dead but only ended up mangling themselves in the process. As he explained, the hosts gradually got a little less uneasy, and when Ed had finished and everyone had had a chance to absorb all of the information, almost all of them took pity on the brothers, much as Tamaki had done, though Kyoya was still suspicious. After the hosts had gotten over the explanation of Alphonse and agreed not to tell anyone about the brothers' story, Ed and Al turned their attention to Krona, wondering how he could see souls and what they looked like. Krona said that he would explain later and excused himself from the room, claiming that he had something going on that evening and he was going to be late if he didn't leave now. He made it outside and breathed a huge sigh of relief, joyful that his plan hadn't been revealed and that it seemed that Ed and Al were much more inclined to try and become friends with him. He started off towards the house he was staying at, wondering what Medusa would order him to do next. Meanwhile, Medusa turned on the computer and typed "Suo Tamaki" into the school record search engine. She had already examined the files of everyone in this so-called host club that Krona had been hanging out in after school, but it never hurt to check them out again in case there was a small detail that she had missed that could indicate that one of the members was the pure soul. She hadn't admitted it to Krona, but even Medusa herself had no real notion of how to find the pure soul. The only lead she had was that the person owning the soul went to Auron Academy, and even that clue had been told to her by someone else. After reading Tamaki's file, Medusa sighed and was about to type in Hitakian, when there was a loud knock on the office door. Medusa frowned, wondering who would want to bother her this late in the evening. She knew that most of the staff had gone home already. "Come in," the witch commanded, closing the window on the computer screen. She looked towards the doorway and let out a little gasp when a woman wearing a long, low-cut green dress entered the room. "Lust!" Medusa exclaimed, standing up, and the woman smiled. She brushed her long, black hair out of her face and walked over to Medusa, stopping in front of her desk. "It's been a while," Lust said as a greeting. She surveyed Medusa's current form as Chairman Suo and raised an eyebrow. "You seem to have changed." Medusa chuckled. "Yes, well, this isn't the most ideal form I'd have chosen, but it gets the job done," the witch said. She cocked her head to one side questioningly. "You're here earlier than I expected." Lust nodded and walked over to the window, staring down at the entrance to the school. "I thought you might need some help," she explained. "I realized that I hadn't given you much to go on besides the name of the school the soul resided in, so I thought if I came sooner we could figure out how to find it faster. Besides, I have a feeling that those Elric brothers might need a nudge in the right direction as well." "Thank you, I'm sure your help will be very useful," Medusa said. "I've sent Krona, my son, to become friends with the Elrics, with the hope that he can help edge them along to creating a Philosopher's Stone. Is this the boy you were telling me about that you used to create the demon sword with? Lust asked, and Medusa nodded, grinning almost devilishly. Lust stared down at the school gates and then she noticed someone leaving the school building. Oh, is that your boy down there now? Medusa went over to the window and looked where Lust had indicated. Sure enough, she saw Krona hurrying out of the gates, his pink hair illuminated by the setting sun. Yes, he's scurrying around as usual, Medusa commented. She crossed her arms in front of her and turned to Lust. So, how did you get the Elrics here so quickly? I thought it would take at least a week, at minimum. Oh, I just planted an obvious clue right in their path and they jumped at the chance to follow it. The corner of Lust's mouth turned up in a smirk. They know about the pure soul and how it can be used to create the Philosopher's Stone, but they think they can find a way to make the stone without actually killing anybody. Ha! Idiots! Excellent, Medusa grinned. Then they'll definitely try and find out how to create the stone as soon as possible. I'll get Krona to help them along. Any hints or clues you want to give to the Elrics, I'll send through Krona. Good. Our plan is going right as scheduled. Lust turned back to the window and glanced at Medusa out of the corner of her eye. And? Our deal is still standing, correct? Of course, Medusa said. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten. Good. Lust started to chuckle darkly, and Medusa soon joined in as well. They then started to discuss the next step in their plan, their laughter still echoing around the room. Chapter 7. The next day, Ed and Al seemed to have a newfound interest in Krona. As soon as they had seen the shy boy that morning, the brothers had stuck by his side whenever they could, trying to get him to discuss his ability to see souls. While Krona was a little taken aback at their sudden enthusiasm, he was also pleased that they were being friendlier with him. When Krona had refused to talk about his abilities at school, for fear that other people might hear and guess that something was up, Ed, Al, and Tamaki had invited him over to Tamaki's house to discuss his strange talents. After consulting with Medusa, who fervently encouraged him to go, Krona soon found himself sliding into Tamaki's sleek, black limo and heading over to the host king's house. I'm so glad you could come over, Krona. Tamaki said as the limo started to move. I've been meaning to invite you over for a while, but I've just been so busy with Ed and Al. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? Ed exclaimed, and Al put a hand on his shoulder. Brother, calm down. The suit of armor sighed, and Ed crossed his arms and pouted. The host club meeting that day had put him in a bad mood, since all of the girls had once again been cooing over how cute he was. Admittedly, he had sort of gotten used to it by this point, but the squeals seemed to have increased after the return of an otaku named Range. She had been visiting France, but when she returned to Auron she immediately stared, assessing what type of hosts Ed, Al, and Krona were, and just being generally annoying. Oh, you know what I meant, Ed, Tamaki said, used to Ed's fits. Anyway, Krona, as I was saying, there's lots of stuff we can do at my house. We could play a game, or sit under a kotetsu, or I could give you a tour of the garden, or dash. He's not here to play, Tamaki, he's here to talk about how he can see souls, Ed cut in, and Tamaki's shoulders slumped. Oh, right. And maybe you could give me a tour after, Krona suggested, and Tamaki's mood immediately brightened. Really? He asked, and Krona nodded. Wonderful. Oh, here we are now. The limo slowed to a stop and the boys climbed out, Krona marveling at the magnificent mansion. Tamaki led them inside to a sitting room and Ed flopped down on one of the couches like he owned the place. Al sat down next to him, pushing his brother's dirty shoes off of the pristine furniture. Krona sat down awkwardly on the couch across from them, and Tamaki took the chair in between Krona and the brothers. So, Krona, Ed began, putting his hands on his knees and leaning towards Krona intently. You have to tell us, how can you actually see souls? I mean, what do they look like? Well, I've always been able to see them, ever since I was little, Krona told him, gripping his arm nervously. He wasn't quite sure exactly how much to reveal about himself, and he didn't want to accidentally give away too much. So you were born with this ability? Alphonse questioned. Yeah, I guess so. And what do they look like? Ed asked eagerly. Well, it's kind of a sphere with a little tail on it, Krona tried to explain, but everyone just looked confused. Maybe I could try and draw it. Hold on, I'll be right back, Tamaki said, jumping up and running out of the room. He appeared a few seconds later with a sketchbook and some pencils and handed them to Krona, who proceeded to do a basic sketch of a circle with a squiggly tail coming out of the top. That's what it looks like, Krona said, tapping the drawing. But I can usually only see this if the person is dead. Normally dash. What do you mean if the person is dead? Ed interjected. Can you just go to a cemetery and they'll all be floating above the graves? Well, no, they have to have died recently. And you've seen people who've just died. Krona was silent, knowing that if he said yes he would have to tell them where he'd seen the dead bodies. He knew he couldn't tell them about Ragnarok's unnatural appetite for human souls and that he, Krona, was the one who had to supply them. Ed and Al stared at Krona questioningly until Tamaki spoke up. Guys, Krona obviously doesn't want to talk about that right now. Sorry if that was a touchy subject, Al apologized. Anyway, does that mean you usually see something different? Kind of, Krona said cautiously, worried that he was accidentally going to let something slip. He hoped that Ragnarok would speak up if he went too far. I can see people's soul wavelengths when they're alive, but it just looks like a glowing orb around the person's body. Sometimes, though, if the soul is really strong it will have some distinct marking on it. Once, I met this boy with these stripes dash. He suddenly stopped, snapping his mouth shut. He thought it would probably be best not to mention any encounters with weapon meisters to Ed, Al, and Tamaki. After a moment of expectant silence, Ed sat up and stretched, guessing that he wasn't going to get much more out of Krona at this point. Well, that's some talent you got there, he said, grinning at Krona. So, I'm guessing since you told us about your abilities, you want to know a little about ours, right? About how we can do alchemy, I mean. Oh, yes. Krona exclaimed, not believing that this amazing opportunity had presented itself. The boys raised their eyebrows, surprised at Krona's enthusiasm. Krona shrunk down in his seat. I mean, if you really want to show me. The brothers nodded and stood up, saying that it would be best if they went outside so Al wouldn't have to draw a transmutation circle on Tamaki's lovely floors. I think you'll be impressed by their skills, Tamaki said to Krona as they walked towards the driveway. I've seen them do alchemy before, and it's amazing. Ed doesn't even need a transmutation circle. A transmutation circle? Krona said, not knowing what Tamaki was talking about. Before Tamaki could answer, the group reached the driveway, and Ed produced a piece of chalk from his pocket, which Alphonse promptly took and started to draw with on the black surface. Meanwhile, Ed ran around the side of the house and came back with a piece of firewood, which he then placed in the center of the circle when Al had finished drawing it. Alright, Krona, first thing you need to know about how alchemy works. Most people need to use a transmutation circle, which is this thing that Al just drew, Ed explained, gesturing to the drawing. Krona tentatively stepped forward to examine it, noticing all of the intricate writing and designs that Alphonse had drawn. I personally don't need to use one of these things, Ed continued. But that's a whole other story. Anyway, so this circle hones your alchemic powers, I guess you could say. That is, it enhances and enables you to control the power that's inside you, if you're an alchemist. Yes, but you have to actually be an alchemist for this to work, Al took over, and Ed nodded in agreement. Some people are born with an affinity for alchemy, while lots of other people aren't. I wasn't born with it, Tamaki muttered sourly, and Krona turned to see him pouting. I tried to do alchemy, but it didn't work. Well, you only heard of it a week ago, Ed said, rolling his eyes. It's no surprise that you can't do it. But whatever, that's beside the point. Yeah, Krona, we'll just show you what we can do, Al said. He raised his hands over the circle but then he paused. Oh, and there's going to be some light and probably a little smoke given off, but don't be alarmed, okay? Krona nodded warily, stepping back, and Al placed his hands on the circle. After a few seconds, a light burst out from beneath his palms and engulfed the chunk of wood, and smoke started to spill out over the circle. Krona's eyes widened and he took a hasty step back, but Tamaki placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's all right," he said reassuringly, grinning. He gestured to the circle. "See?" Krona glanced back at the circle as the smoke cleared and his eyes widened in surprise. In place of the block of wood, there was now a little wooden horse that could easily fit in the palm of someone's hand. Al picked up the horse and held it out to Krona, who cautiously took it. "That's just a little taste of what alchemy can do," Ed said as Krona examined the horse. "As long as you have the right materials to start out with, you can make almost anything." This is amazing," Krona said quietly. The only other type of person he knew who could do something like this was a witch, and he was positive that Ed and Al weren't magical in the least. He would have to tell Medusa about this later, maybe she could use this to her advantage. "Krona, you should try it," Tamaki said suddenly, startling everyone. "Tamaki, didn't you hear Al's explanation a few minutes ago?" Ed said, looking at Tamaki like he was an idiot. "You can't just all of a sudden start doing alchemy, you have to be born with the skills. What makes you think Krona can do it?" His brother gave him a chiding look. "Ed, that was rude." "Oh, no offense, Krona," Ed said quickly, but Krona hadn't seemed to notice his comment. He was gazing at the transmutation circle with fascination, wondering if he could actually do alchemy. After all, he was the son of a witch. But, then again, he was never really good at anything, so why would he be good at something like this? "Well, you never know until you try, right, Krona?" Tamaki said, bringing Krona out of his thoughts. Krona looked at the transmutation circle uncertainly. I guess," he said. Tamaki placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, try it," he urged. "You know, actually, now that I think about it, Krona just might be able to do alchemy," Ed said, his forehead crinkled in thought. "I mean, he can see souls after all. Maybe he has some hidden, undiscovered alchemic powers." "Come over here, Krona," Al said, gesturing to the spot next to him on the driveway. "I'll help you." "Do it." Ragnarok hissed in the back of Krona's mind. You never know, you might actually turn out to have a useful talent. "Well, okay," Krona said tentatively. He walked over to Alphonse and crouched down next to the armor. Ed waved his hand over the horse Krona placed in the circle, and with a crackle of light it returned to its original form, a plain block of wood. "All right, Krona, here's how this is going to work," Al said as Ed and Tamaki sat down to watch. "It's really simple. Put your hands on the circle and just imagine that block of wood breaking down and then reforming into the shape of, let's say a dog this time." Come on, Al, give him something simple to start out with," Ed piped up. "How about a snake or something?" "A snake," Krona said, his eyes widening as he thought of Medusa. "Oh, you don't like snakes? Fine, then just stick with a dog." "Whatever." "Okay, a dog it is," Alphonse spoke up before his brother could make any more suggestions. He addressed the pink-haired boy next to him. "So, Krona, just put your hands on the circle and imagine the wood turning into the shape of a dog. If you can do alchemy, it should transform, but if you can't, nothing will happen. Got it?" "Yeah, I think so," Krona said, and Al nodded and scooted back to give him some more room. Krona nervously put his hands on the circle, aware of everyone's eyes on him. He stared at the block of wood, envisioning it transforming into a wooden dog, putting all his focus on that image. Nothing happened for a few seconds and Krona was about to give up, when suddenly a huge cloud of light and smoke burst out from his fingertips, actually knocking Ed and Tamaki back a few inches. Krona gasped and stared at the center of the circle, frozen with amazement that something had actually happened. When the smoke cleared a moment later, a detailed wooden dog was sitting where the block of wood had just been. Gingerly, Krona reached out and picked it up, turning it over in his hands. I did it," he said quietly, still in shock. Ed, Al, and Tamaki crowded around him, all wanting to see what he'd made. "Wow, look at it, brother," Al exclaimed. "That's pretty detailed for a first attempt." "Yeah, who knew Krona was an alchemist?" Ed said. He held out his hand. "Can I see it?" Krona nodded and handed him the dog. Ed took it and walked a few feet away with his brother, marveling at the craftsmanship. Tamaki scooted over next to Krona, who was once again staring at the ground. "You don't look too happy," Tamaki commented. Krona jumped, startled. "What? Oh, no, it's just. I've never been able to do anything like that before. I don't know how to deal with it," Krona tried to explain. Tamaki noticed that the boy did look a little shaken up. "Every time I've tried to do something like magic or alchemy when I wasn't told to, I was punished." Krona shivered at the memories and Tamaki put a tentative arm around his shoulders. Krona flinched but didn't make any attempt to push him away. Tamaki took this as a good sign that Krona was becoming a little less reserved. "Your parents must have been very strict, huh?" Tamaki asked, and Krona shook his head ever so slightly. "My mother. I've never really had a father," Krona said, struggling to find the words to explain. He knew he was dangerously close to revealing too much, but Tamaki's comforting arm around his shoulders made Krona feel like spilling his heart out to the blonde, though he didn't know why. "No father? Oh, you poor boy," Tamaki exclaimed, a sympathetic expression on his face. "Well, then your mother must be a wonderful woman to raise you all by herself, am I right?" "Well. Hey, you'd better shut your mouth before you let something slip," Ragnarok snarled in the back of Krona's mind. Krona immediately stopped talking and abruptly pushed Tamaki's arm away. The strange spell Tamaki seemed to have cast instantly vanished and Krona shook his head, wondering what that had been about. He stood up and Tamaki followed suit, gazing at him worriedly. Tamaki opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Ed and Al came over to them. "What were you guys talking about?" Ed asked, and Krona noticed Tamaki's face immediately brighten. He sure can hide his emotions fast, Krona thought, impressed that Tamaki was able to make it seem as if he hadn't been concerned about something just a few seconds ago. "We were talking about Krona's mother," Tamaki informed Edward. Ed frowned at Krona. "Your mother? What about your dad?" he asked. Krona gripped his arm and stared at the ground. "I don't have one. Just like you two," Tamaki said, happy that he was able to make a connection between them. Ed rolled his eyes and Al cleared his throat. "Well, not exactly," Al said kindly. "We do still have a dad dash." "No we don't. He's just currently missing," Al continued, ignoring his brother's outburst. "But, as you already know, our mother is gone for good." "Yeah, Krona, at least your mom's still around," Ed said, smiling sadly. That's not necessarily a good thing, Krona thought, but he didn't dare utter such a thought. Instead, he stayed silent and mentally scolded himself for thinking such a thing. "Anyway," Ed said after a moment of awkward silence. "That dog you made was amazing, Krona. Really advanced for a first try. How about we work on making something else? Who knows, with training, your alchemic powers might even make it to state alchemist level." No, actually, I should probably be getting home," Krona said. Ed and Al seemed disappointed, but they said goodbye anyway. Tamaki offered to lend Krona a limo to get home, but Krona insisted that he could walk. He started to head down the driveway, waving to Ed, Al, and Tamaki until they were out of sight. As Tamaki's mansion disappeared from sight, Krona wondered what Medusa would say when she learned that he could do alchemy. She would either be happy that he had a useful talent and implement it into her plans, or she would be angry and Krona would certainly get punished. Krona gripped his arm nervously, he would just have to wait and see. Chapter 8. Krona returned to the house he was staying at to find Medusa waiting for him. Normally, Medusa stayed in Suo Mansion number 1, but she had forbidden Krona to stay with her to avoid arousing suspicion. People would quickly start to question why Chairman Suo had one day decided to take in a random child, and Medusa didn't want anyone to suspect that something was up. So, Krona was forced to stay in a nearby house by himself while its current residents were out on vacation, and Medusa rarely visited him there. Therefore it came as quite a shock to Krona when he opened the door and saw Medusa sitting on the living room couch, chatting with an unfamiliar woman. They turned when they heard the door open and Medusa smiled at Krona. "There you are. Come over here, Krona," she commanded, gesturing with her finger for him to come closer to her. He walked over and stopped in front of the couch, gripping arm and casting nervous glances at the unfamiliar woman. She had long, black hair, a low-cut dark green dress, and a strange tattoo in the center of her chest. "Krona, this is Lust," Medusa said, gesturing to the woman, who smiled. Krona noticed that she had almost the same malicious grin as Medusa. "Nice to finally meet you," Lust said, and Krona could only force himself to nod quickly. "This is the woman I was telling you about, the one who sent Edward and Alphonse here so that they could create the Philosopher's Stone," Medusa explained. "She's going to be staying with us to help the Elrics behind the scenes." Krona vaguely recalled Medusa telling him about a woman who was working with her in her plan to make the stone. He stared at Lust, wondering if she was a witch as well. Although, he was getting a different vibe from her soul wavelength than he got from Medusa's, so he didn't really believe that she was a witch. "Does he always stare at people he just met like this?" Lust asked, sounding bemused as Krona continued to look at her. "Krona!" Medusa snapped, and the boy immediately shrunk away from her voice. Medusa smiled apologetically at Lust. "I'm sorry about him, he's not a very social person." "Oh, it's all right, he seems like a good kid," Lust commented. Medusa's gaze flicked to her son. "Yes, he's been very good so far in helping our plan along," she said. There was silence for a moment, and then Medusa cleared her throat, bringing Krona's attention from the floor to her face. "Well, Krona, if there's nothing you need to report to me, then I'd like to spend a little more time discussing things with Lust, so you can leave." The witch gestured to the doorway. Krona started to take a step towards it, but then he hesitated, gripping his arm tighter. Actually, Lady Medusa, there is something I need to tell you," he said slowly. Both Medusa and Lust sat up straighter, seeming interested. "What is it?" Medusa prompted when Krona didn't continue. Krona looked around nervously, as if searching for the words to tell her. Just as Medusa appeared to be getting annoyed, Ragnarok shot out of Krona's back, making the boy double over in pain. Lust jumped, startled by this sudden appearance, but Medusa reassured her. "Don't be alarmed, it's just the demon sword I told you about," she explained, and Lust nodded in recognition. "Ah, yes, I remember, you said he was a part of Krona's bloodstream." "Yes, Ragnarok is his name." "I see." While this conversation was taking place, Ragnarok had once again taken to bullying his Meister. "You idiot!" the demon sword yelled, tugging on Krona's hair. "Why don't you just tell her what you can do? Making her wait is just getting her angrier." "Ow, Ragnarok, don't pull my hair!" Krona whined, trying unsuccessfully to dislodge Ragnarok's hands from where they were clamped onto his pink locks. "If you pull too hard my hair will fall out, and I don't know how to deal with that." "Then just tell her about your alchemy." "What's this about alchemy?" Lust asked, instantly tuning into their conversation. Krona found out that he can do alchemy, Ragnarok cut in, knowing that his Meister wasn't going to be able to utter those words anytime soon. Said boy tensed, shooting Ragnarok a terrified look as Medusa and Lust's mouths fell open. "Is this true?" Medusa asked, addressing her son. Krona nodded meekly, but the witch seemed unconvinced. "Show me." I can't," Krona said quietly, and then he yelped and took a step back when Medusa stood up threateningly. "What do you mean you can't?" she snarled. "This is very important information. You'd better not be lying to me." "No, Lady Medusa, he can do alchemy." Ragnarok spoke up quickly, knowing that if Krona was punished, he would be as well. "What he's trying to say is that he needs a transmutation circle to show you. But he can do it, I saw it myself." "They're probably telling the truth," Lust said, standing up and putting a hand on Medusa's shoulder as the witch eyed Krona and Ragnarok suspiciously. "I only know of a few alchemists who don't need to use a transmutation circle, Edward Elric, for one, but it's pretty uncommon." "That may be, but this is Krona we're talking about," Medusa said, and Krona stared dejectedly at the floor. "He can't do anything except wield Ragnarok, and he even has issues with that sometimes." "Well, if he's your son, then that means he's the son of a witch," Lust pointed out. "You never know, maybe he has some untapped magic power that just manifested itself in the form of alchemy. Medusa looked from Krona and Ragnarok to Lust, debating whether to believe them without any actual proof. Eventually, she sighed and sat back down on the couch. "All right, I'll take your word for it," she said, and Krona relaxed slightly. Medusa narrowed her eyes at him. "But you will show me that you can do alchemy tomorrow." "Yes, Lady Medusa," Krona agreed, bowing his head again. "This can definitely work to our advantage," Lust commented, sitting down as well. "Yes," Medusa agreed, her mouth curling up in a malicious grin. She gave her son a stern look. "Krona, Lust, and I need to discuss this. Go take a walk or something and come back in about 2 hours." "Yes, Lady Medusa," Krona said again, wincing as Ragnarok disappeared into his back. "Bye, Krona," Lust said, smiling slightly and making Krona very uneasy. With a quick wave, he hurried out of the house. As Krona walked down the street, he realized that he had no idea of where he was going. The only places he really knew about were the school and Tamaki's house. The school would surely be closed for the evening by now, and he didn't want to just randomly show up at Tamaki's house. "I suppose I could head over to the store," he thought, frowning, "but it's a little far, and I don't know if I'll have time. Come to think of it, I forgot to check what time it was when I left. I was in such a hurry." "Krona." A faint voice calling his name brought Krona out of his thoughts. He looked around and saw Haruai standing across the street, waving to him. Krona blinked in confusion at Haruai's outfit, a tan, knee-length dress that tied around Haruai's neck over a light brown tank top and a few random necklaces draped over everything. Krona had been under the impression that Haruai was a boy after all. The kid was in the host club, but now he was having second thoughts. "Hey, Krona," Haruai said once she'd made her was across the street. "What are you doing out here?" Krona just continued to stare at her. "Haruai, why are you wearing that outfit?" he managed to ask after a moment. "It's so girly." "Oh, right, I guess you haven't figured it out yet." Haruai laughed, making Krona even more confused. "Well, while I may be in the host club, I'm actually a girl. You see, I broke a really expensive vase from Auron a while ago, and I have to pay it back somehow. As to why I'm paying it back this way, well, that's kind of a long story." Krona merely blinked as she finished her explanation, trying to absorb all of this information. "So, you're not a boy?" he asked after a few seconds. Haruai smiled and shook her head. "Nope. Sorry for confusing you," she apologized. She knew that Krona was already flustered enough as it is without having to process the fact that the person he'd thought was a boy for a little over a week was actually a girl. "But you're a host. And a girl," Krona sputtered, looking utterly confused. "How? Oh, I don't know how to deal with all of this." He clutched his head and sunk to his knees, not wanting to have to think about this revelation on top of all his other problems. Everything he was supposed to do and everything he had learned ran through his head at once. He had to find the pure soul and create the Philosopher's Stone. He had to become friends with the Elric brothers. He had to make sure not to blow his cover and reveal what he was up to while infiltrating the school. He found out that he could do alchemy, and Medusa was sure to ask him to do something with this talent for her plan, and now Haruai was telling him that she was a girl. When he got down to it, Krona realized that he had a lot to think about. Are you okay?" Haruai asked hesitantly when Krona didn't move after a few minutes. She reached out to touch his shoulder, when suddenly she heard a car drive up and stop next to her. She looked up and realized that it was a sleek, black limo. She groaned, knowing that it belonged to at least one of the 6 other hosts. Sure enough, the first thing she saw when the windows rolled down were 2 shocks of orange hair, followed by 2 identical grinning faces. "Hi, Haruai," the twins chorused, waving. "Hey, guys," Haruai replied, turning her attention back to Krona, who was staring up at the limo like a deer in headlights. Haruai then realized that from his viewpoint, Krona couldn't see who was inside. Just as she was about to reassure him that it was just the twins, Hikaru and Kaoru poked their heads out of the window. "Whoa, hey there, Krona," Hikaru said, surprised to see Krona crouched on the ground. "What are you doing down there?" Kaoru asked, raising one eyebrow. Krona slowly stood up, trying to push everything except what was happening right now to the back of his mind. Well, I was. Krona trailed off, trying to think of what to say, but Haruai stepped in to help him. He realized that I'm a girl and got a little overwhelmed, she explained. The twins gave Haruai a condescending look. Well, you're not really doing much to hide that fact, Hikaru pointed out, eyeing her outfit. Yeah, why are you dressed like that anyway? Kaoru asked. Not that we're complaining, she looks so cute. The twins both thought at the same time, but for once they didn't say what was on their minds. My dad made me wear it, Haruai explained, rolling her eyes at the memory. I just had to head out to the store, but he insisted that I wear this. He wouldn't let me out of the house otherwise. Yeah, we can see Runka doing that, the twins nodded. They then looked at each other, grinned, and looked back at Haruai and Krona. If you guys need a ride home, we'd be happy to give you a lift, Kaoru told them. No thanks, I'll be fine, Haruai said, and the twins pouted. I'm sure Tono would say otherwise, Hikaru said. He'd probably be worried about his darling daughter getting kidnapped. Yeah, by you too, Haruai snapped back. Seriously, guys, I'm fine. Alright, whatever, Kaoru said. He looked at Krona. What about you, Krona? You need a ride. Where do you live, anyway? Hikaru asked, and Krona immediately averted his gaze to the ground. Oh, around. He said, remembering that Medusa had instructed him not to reveal where he was staying. The twins frowned at him. Around. Don't push him for information, guys, Haruai spoke up. You know he doesn't like it. Okay, so do you need a ride or not? Hikaru asked, grinning as Haruai started to get worked up again. Last chance. Actually, I am not going home, Krona said. I'm supposed to stay out for 2 hours. Who told you to do that? The twins asked. And at this time of day it's already dark out here. Haruai pointed out. Well, my mother said I had to, Krona explained, and the twins and Haruai just stared at him. Whose mother tells their child to go out walking for 2 hours at night? Hikaru asked. Especially when it's dark. Kaoru added. Krona looked at the ground, gripped his arm, and started to bite his bottom lip. The twins realized that their questioning was getting to be too much for the boy to handle, so they backed off. Well, why don't you just ride around with us for a little while, Hikaru suggested. Krona glanced at him, his eyes wide. Oh no, I wouldn't want to impose. You're not imposing. Kaoru assured him. We just don't want you to be walking around in the dark for 2 hours. I'll go with you, if you want, Haruai said, putting a hand on Krona's shoulder. The twins' faces immediately brightened. Haruai, you'll come, too. For Krona's sake, not yours, she snapped. Wah, Haruai, you're so mean. They cried, their expression turning sad, but Haruai could still see the spark in their eyes that let her know that they enjoyed aggravating her. Oh, stop crying, she said, and then she held out her hand to Krona. Do you want to go? We'll be sure to get you back in time, Kaoru reassured him as Hikaru opened the car door. Well, okay. Krona said, somewhat reluctantly. He took Haruai's hand and followed her into the limo, leaning over to avoid banging his head on the low door frame. The twins shut the door and motioned for the driver to go, and they were off. The twins tried to talk to Krona, but he seemed to be lost in thought once again, so they left him alone. Instead, they settled for asking Haruai about commoner food, and what it was like to shop at a commoner supermarket. Krona managed to drown out their laughter and Haruai's flat-toned answers as he thought about what Medusa and Lust were discussing. All he knew was that whatever it was going to involve him, and he had to be ready for anything. He could never tell what Medusa's plans were going to be, and he just hoped that this one wasn't too out of his league. After their alchemy lesson with Krona, Ed, Al, and Tamaki decided to head upstairs to get started on their homework. Not that Ed was actually planning on doing it, after all, he was only going to be there temporarily, so why waste his efforts on homework when he could be searching for clues to the stone? He really wanted to find out more about this pure soul he and Alphonse had heard about right before they'd found themselves in this strange world. Heck, that was the reason they'd went to Lab 5 in the first place. They claimed to be looking for a clue to the stone, but they'd never mentioned to anyone what that clue had been. Ed hadn't even told Roy Mustang when the colonel had questioned him. Edward and Alphonse had come across a mention of the pure soul in their research, and soon after had received a mysterious note directing them to the room in Lab 5, which had turned out to be a broom closet at our own academy. The strange thing was, the note had the symbol of a homunculus at the bottom, a detail which had greatly intrigued the brothers. They had ventured to Lab 5 with caution, unaware if it was a trap, but it had turned out to be not a trap, but... well, they still didn't really know what it had turned out to be. A portal to another dimension was Ed's guess, since there were things in this world that Ed and Al would never have even dreamed of, like these things called computers that could connect to something called the Internet. Ed was thinking of their sudden appearance in Tamaki's world as he opened the door to his room. However, as soon as he entered the room, he noticed something was wrong. It was cold. No, more than cold, it was freezing. Ed quickly deduced that this was caused by the open window next to the bed, the curtains billowing at every gust of wind. He wondered if one of Tamaki's maids had come in and opened the window, though why they would open it on such a cold night as this Ed had no idea. Ed went over to the window and clamped it shut, shivering as one last gust of wind flowed through the room. He sat down on the bed and frowned when he noticed something white fall onto the floor. Curious, he picked it up and realized it was a note card. He turned it over and noticed a single line scribbled onto the card in black ink. "Don't search too hard, the pure soul is closer than you think." Under this sentence was a symbol that was all too familiar to the young alchemist, a dragon with two small wings forming a circle around three triangles covering three more upside-down triangles. The homunculi symbol. Ed gasped, realized that it was the same writing as the one that had told him and Alphonse to go to Lab 5. He quickly jumped off the bed and ran to the door. Al. Come here," he called, flinging the door open and charging down the hallway, forgetting in his excitement that Alphonse's room was right next to his. "Brother, what is it?" Al asked, coming out of his room. Ed showed him the note and he gasped in surprise. It's the same as before." "Yeah, I know. What's with all the yelling?" Tamaki questioned sleepily, emerging from his room and rubbing his eyes. Apparently, he'd been taking a nap. "Tamaki, check this out," Ed said, thrusting the note in Tamaki's face. The host king blinked, rubbed his eyes, and frowned, staring at the note. "Pure soul. What does that mean?" he asked. Ed clicked his tongue in annoyance. "The pure soul. You know, the thing we're looking for. But more importantly, do you dash?" "Brother," Al cut Ed off when Tamaki continued to stare at them in confusion. "We told him about our past, but we never told him why we're here right now, remember?" "Oh, right," Ed said. He shrugged, grinning at Alphonse. "Well, I guess it's time for another explanation, right, Al?" Al nodded, and then the brothers turned to Tamaki. "Tamaki, remember how we told you that we've been trying to restore our bodies, and we've found something that can help us achieve that goal?" Ed asked, and Tamaki nodded. "Well, it's called the Philosopher's Stone, and it's an object that people claim can defy the laws of alchemy and completely ignore the rule of equivalent exchange. There's something that can really do that." Tamaki breathed, amazed. "Some people believe so, but others are skeptical," Al explained. "Personally, the stone is the only hope we have at this point of reclaiming our original bodies." "Yeah, but unfortunately everything has a price, and the stone is no different." Ed looked at the ground sourly. "To create the stone, you need human sacrifices, lots and lots of human sacrifices." "That's horrible," Tamaki gasped, putting his hands to his mouth. Ed laughed cynically. "Yeah, well, alchemy isn't always as innocent as making little horses out of wood," he said, and Tamaki could hear the bitterness in his voice. Anyway, Alphonse spoke up, knowing his brother was starting to feel the regrets of their past once again. "When we found out what it took to create the stone, we were devastated, naturally. We could never sacrifice hundreds of lives just to get our two insignificant bodies back." "Hundreds?" Tamaki echoed, his face paling at the thought of that many people perishing to create just one object. "Yup, hundreds," Ed confirmed, having regained his composure. So, we started looking for other ways to get our bodies back. After searching for weeks, Al and I stumbled across the mention of something called the pure soul. It piqued our interest, so we started doing some research on it. We came to find that it wasn't a thing, but a person, and more specifically, a person that had something to do with the Philosopher's Stone. You see, by creating the stone by using the pure soul, only one soul would be lost. The pure soul is so powerful that it can create the stone all by itself, without needing to sacrifice any other souls. So we figured that if we found the pure soul, we'd be able to create the stone without taking hundreds of lives. Alphonse finished the explanation. Tamaki was silent for a moment as he processed all of the information. But, if this is all true, then you'll still need to sacrifice the pure soul a human life, he pointed out, frowning. Surely you wouldn't. Of course we wouldn't kill anyone. Ed snapped, not believing that Tamaki would even think such a thing. Once we find the pure soul, we'll figure out a way to make the stone without actually killing them. We're not quite sure how at this point, but we'll figure it out eventually. Right, Al. Right, Al agreed. Ed glanced at Tamaki and scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Although, at this point we're not exactly sure how to even find the pure soul. He laughed. That's how we ended up here. We heard there was a clue to the pure soul, and in turn the Philosopher's Stone, in this room at a place called Lab 5, and like we explained before, when we went through the door we ended up at your school. So now you finally have the whole story, Alphonse said. He chuckled at Tamaki's lost expression. Sorry, too much information at once. No, I'm alright, I just... Wow, I mean... That must be one powerful soul if it can take the place of hundreds, Tamaki said, and Ed and Al nodded. Tamaki then glanced down at the card still clutched in Edward's grip. So, what's so important about that card then? Well, besides the fact that someone obviously knows more about finding the pure soul than we do, this symbol is the mark of a homunculus. Ed tapped the symbol at the bottom of the note card, and Tamaki stared at it questioningly. Homunculus. They're artificial humans, Al explained. Beings created from the bodies of people brought back to life through alchemy. Oh, Tamaki said. He wondered if Ed and Al's mother had been turned into a homunculus, but he didn't want to ask. He was already overloaded with information as it was. Plus he didn't think the brothers would really want to talk about it. So, he just settled for asking, what do they have to do with the pure soul? It's not so much the pure soul that they have to do with as it is the stone, Ed informed him. They want to use the stone to turn themselves human. They've realized that we wanted to create the stone as well and have been following us ever since. One of them must have followed us here. But can't they just make the stone and find the pure soul themselves? Tamaki asked as Ed muttered a curse under his breath. Alphonse shook his head. No. They can't do alchemy. Oh, Tamaki said again. After a moment of silence, Ed tightened his grip on the note and looked at Al and Tamaki, his gaze determined. We've got to find out who left the note, he told them. It might not even be a homunculi, it could be someone working with them, or someone just using their symbol to try and fool us. Whoever it is, they know how to find the pure soul. Come on, Al, let's go. Whoa, hold on. Tamaki exclaimed, grabbing Ed's arm as the boy started to walk towards the stairs. Where are you going at this time of night? Out to town, Ed replied, trying to pry Tamaki's hands off but failing. We have to see if anyone knows where the homunculus or whoever left the note is. Maybe someone in town will. You can't leave now. Tamaki said, knowing that it wasn't safe to be walking around at night, no matter how nice his neighborhood was. It's already dark outside. I don't care. Let go. Ed tried once again to jerk his arm out of Tamaki's grip, but the tall blonde refused to let go. Ed could swear he heard the creaking of straining metal. Thank God it's auto mail, Ed thought, or my arm probably would have been wrenched out of its socket a while ago. Once again, I've gotta admire Winry's handiwork. Brother, I think Tamaki has a point, Al piped up, and Ed glared at him. Think about it. Everybody's probably gone home by now, we should just wait until tomorrow when everyone's out and about. Ed stared into his brother's glowing eyes for a minute, and then sighed, defeated by common sense once again. "All right, fine, we'll wait until tomorrow." "Yay!" Tamaki exclaimed, happy that Ed and Al would be safe for the night. He gave Ed a hug, actually lifting the boy off the ground a few inches. "Hey! Put me down, will you?" Ed yelled, and Al started laughing. Tamaki released him and Ed dropped to the floor, landing on his feet with a grunt. "Ah, sorry, Mon Ami." Tamaki apologized. Ed straightened out his shirt, glared at Tamaki, and started to head towards the stairs. "Where are you going now, Ed?" Al asked. Without looking back, Ed replied. "The kitchen. I'm starving." And with that he descended the grand staircase, his mind buzzing with questions about who had left that note and, if it really was a homunculus, why they didn't just contact him directly instead of leaving secret letters. It was all very strange. Chapter 9. When Krona returned home 2 hours later, Medusa and Lust were nowhere to be found. He reasoned that they must have gone back to the main mansion, so he got ready for bed and started to worry if he really would be able to show Medusa that he could do alchemy the next day. For all he knew, it could have just been some weird fluke when he'd tried it at Tamaki's house, and he actually couldn't do alchemy at all. He tried to push these worries out of his mind the next day when he went to ask Ed and Al if they could show him how to write a transmutation circle. The day was so hectic that Krona didn't get a chance to ask the brothers about this until they were all once again seated in Tamaki's limo on the way to the host king's house. Ed and Al told Krona that they would be happy to show him how to write a transmutation circle. However, much to Krona's dismay, they had to go out to town for a little while, though they wouldn't tell him why, and Krona would have to wait for them to come back to Tamaki's house. When they promised that they would be back after a few hours, Krona reluctantly agreed to wait at Tamaki's house and waved goodbye when Ed and Al stepped out of the limo at the entrance to the town square. Thus, Krona was left with Tamaki for the next few hours. This made Krona nervous. He recalled the weird feelings he got around Tamaki, about wanting to spill his heart out, and was afraid that he might accidentally reveal something to the blonde that he shouldn't. He wanted to go to his temporary home and wait for Ed and Al to come back, but Ragnarok convinced him that there was no point in this, so before Krona knew it he was once again exiting the limo at Suo Mansion number 2. "I'm so glad you could come over again, Krona," Tamaki said enthusiastically as he led the pink-haired boy up the stairs towards his room. "Now I can finally give you that tour of my house that we never got around to yesterday." Yeah, right," Krona said absently, already wondering when Ed and Al would be back. Tamaki led him into a large room with a king-sized bed, a large closet, lots of furniture, and a beautiful, bay window that had an amazing view of the gardens surrounding the mansion. Krona stared out the window in wonder, transfixed by all of the vibrant colors of the flowers. "Oh, Krona," Tamaki said, bringing the boy's attention back to him. "I have to go tell the servants something, but I'll be back in a few minutes. Will you be okay on your own for a little bit?" "Oh, yes, I'll be fine," Krona said, and Tamaki smiled. "Okay then. Feel free to have a look around, I don't mind. Be back in a bit." And with that he bounded out of the room, leaving Krona all alone. As Krona gazed around the room, he noticed a picture on the dresser by Tamaki's bed. Curious, he picked it up and examined it. It was a woman with long, wavy blonde hair and soft blue eyes. She was very beautiful, and on closer inspection Krona realized that she resembled Tamaki quite a lot. Just then, Krona heard footsteps running up the stairs, and said boy came jogging back into the room. "Sorry about that," he apologized, smiling. He walked over and saw what Krona was holding. "Oh, so you found that, huh? Who is she?" Krona asked. "She looks so much like you." "That's my mom, man, my mother," Tamaki replied, and Krona glanced at him. Though he was still smiling, Krona could detect a hint of sadness in the blonde's eyes. Did something happen to her?" Krona asked tentatively, afraid he was going to accidentally upset him. Tamaki gazed at the picture and shook his head ever so slightly. "No, She lives in France, so I don't get to see her very often," Tamaki told him. He cleared his throat and Krona could swear he saw Tamaki's eyes starting to water a little bit. "Do you miss her?" Krona questioned. There seemed to be more to the story than Tamaki was telling him, but he didn't want to press too much for information. Tamaki let out a slight, almost said chuckle and nodded. Yes, I do miss her. Very much. After a few more seconds of staring at the picture longingly, Tamaki blinked and looked at Krona, grinning again. But it's okay, because I love her with all my heart and I know she loves me just the same, so no matter how far apart we are we'll always be connected by our hearts. As Krona stared into Tamaki's eyes, filled with obvious adoration for his mother, that feeling of spilling his heart out started to overtake him again. However, this time it was slightly different. Instead of wanting to tell Tamaki absolutely everything, Krona could only seem to focus on Medusa, and how little she cared for him as opposed to how much Tamaki's mother must care for her son if they had such a strong bond between them. To Krona's great surprise, as these thoughts ran through his head, he started to feel a dampness in the corners of his eyes. Krona, what's wrong? Tamaki asked, getting concerned when the boy started to tear up. He'd never shown this much emotion before, so Tamaki wondered if he had done something to set him off. Did talking about my mother upset you? Tamaki gently gripped Krona's shoulders and Krona stared at him, the tears threatening to fall. You love your mother so much, Krona said, and Tamaki frowned, wondering what he was trying to get at. And I'm sure she loves you just the same. My mother. No matter how hard I try, I can never make her love me. Ah, so the truth finally comes out, Tamaki thought as Krona's resistance finally crumbled and he broke down. The tears streamed down his face and he gripped his arm tightly, dropping the picture of Tamaki's mother. Tamaki caught it before it hit the floor and then turned back to Krona, who had started to talk through his sobs. She wants me to do so much, and I try hard, but I can never do anything right. He blubbered. And no matter what I do, she's never shown me any love. I can't deal with it anymore. Ah, come on now, I'm sure deep down she loves you a lot, even if she doesn't show it, Tamaki tried to reassure him, but Krona shook his head vehemently. No, she doesn't. And no matter how hard I try, I am always being punished. But I'm sure you don't know what I've been through. Krona suddenly yelled, startling Tamaki. He looked more tortured than Tamaki had ever seen him before, which greatly unnerved the blonde. All the things she's put me though. All the pain I've had to endure. And all the times I've had to deal with him. You just don't know, Krona finished in a whisper. Tamaki merely stared at him, his mouth open slightly. Krona, Tamaki tried to console him, but for once he was at a complete loss of what to say. There was a darker side to Krona that he'd known nothing about, and it pained Tamaki to see the shy boy hurting so badly. Slowly, so as not to startle the still sniffling boy, Tamaki took a step forward and wrapped his arms around Krona's shoulders, hugging him tightly. Krona let out a gasp of surprise and immediately started to struggle in Tamaki's grip, but after a moment his eyes refilled with tears and he buried his face in Tamaki's chest, sobbing as Tamaki whispered comforting words in his ear. There, it's all right, let it all out. You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. Oh, vous enfant pauvre et torture star. If I'd have known what you've been going through earlier, I would have helped you sooner. Tamaki waited a moment for Krona to calm down some and then released him from the hug. He gripped Krona's shoulders and stared into the boy's face. Krona, look at me, he said, and Krona gazed at him, still crying slightly. Listen to me, no matter what you've gone through in the past, or what you're going through now, I want you to know that I'll be there for you no matter what from here on out. Krona gaped at him, not believing what the blonde was saying. Nobody had ever cared about him before, so why should Tamaki, the host king, of all people? But, I've only known you for about a week. Krona pointed out, trying to make Tamaki see how illogical he sounded. Tamaki shook his head. It doesn't matter, he said firmly, squeezing Krona's shoulders. As a member of the host club, and because of my own beliefs, I strive to help others in need whenever I can. And right now, I think you need my help more than anyone else. But why? Because you're my friend, Mon Ami. Tamaki smiled. Aren't you? Well. Yes, I guess so. Krona admitted. However, he was still having a hard time processing what Tamaki was saying. But no one's ever been friendly to me before. I scare everyone away, so no one likes me. That's not true. Tamaki said, surprised. I don't think you're scary at all, and I like you a lot. But I'm so strange, no one understands me. There's things about me that if you knew about, you'd run away screaming. Krona's forlorn eyes were haunted, but Tamaki paid no attention to them. No, I wouldn't. Tamaki took Krona's hands in his and gazed firmly into the shy boy's eyes. Everyone has something they don't want people to know about. But just because you don't want people to know about it doesn't make it scary or weird or anything. But Krona, listen to me. No matter what secret you have that you don't want to tell me, I'll always be there for you. You are a dear friend to me, and I always take care of my friends. If there's one thing in your life you can be sure of, it's that fact. After a few seconds of Krona continuing to stare at him blankly, Tamaki once again gripped Krona in a hug. However, much to Tamaki's delight, this time the blonde met no resistance. Why you? You really care about me? Krona said, squeezing his eyes shut to hold back the tears that were once again starting to cloud his vision. Only this time, they weren't tears of sadness. Yes, I do, Tamaki said into Krona's shoulder. Even if no one ever has before, I want you to know that I do care about you, Krona. He released Krona from the hug, gripped his shoulders again, and smiled, his eyes full of sincerity, and Krona felt the corners of his mouth being tugged upwards as well. Now, about your mother. Tamaki started to say, but he instantly regretted it, as soon as he'd mentioned Krona's mother, the ghost of a grin that had been threatening to light up the shy boy's face had instantly vanished. Tamaki mentally berated himself for not giving Krona a chance to show his true smile. Krona gulped and looked at the floor. He started to shake when he realized what he'd just done. He'd just revealed how he truly felt about Lady Medusa. Not only that, he'd also come dangerously close to telling Tamaki about Ragnarok, which would certainly not have been a good thing. Krona, it's all right, Tamaki said, squeezing the boy's shoulder again. He frowned. Is your mother really that horrible? Oh, no. She's not horrible at all, Krona sputtered, frantically trying to cover up what he'd just said. Tamaki's expression hardened. You don't have to cover up for her. If she's done anything to you, anything at all, please tell me. I can get you out of there and into a much better environment to live in. My dad has connections that can help us with this. Why Yuri dad? Krona squeaked, remembering that Tamaki's father was currently being controlled by Medusa. No, please don't tell him. I'll be okay, really. If you're this scared of what's going to happen, I don't think you're going to be okay without some help, Tamaki told him. I don't mean to offend you, but it seems to me that you're not able to stand up to your mother very much, am I right? Well. Even though Krona knew this was true, he didn't want to admit it. He'd said way too much already. Krona, please . Just then, the front door of the house suddenly slammed open and shut, bringing the boys out of their discussion. Tamaki looked out the doorway of his room, and Krona took this momentary distraction as a chance to gently brush Tamaki's hands away from his shoulders. Tamaki glanced back at him, his eyes filled with sympathy and concern. Hey, guys, we're back. Ed's voice came floating up the stairs. I still want to talk to you about this, but we can finish discussing it later. I'm guessing you don't want Ed and Al to know about it, right? Tamaki asked, and Krona shook his head. Tamaki smiled kindly. I'll use everything in my power to help you get through this, so don't get too down, okay, Krona? Krona nodded and Tamaki turned to go find Ed and Al. As Tamaki started to walk away, Krona suddenly got the strongest feeling that he didn't want the blonde to leave. Tamaki! He called out, reaching towards him. What is it? Tamaki asked, turning back to him. Realizing how strange he was acting, Krona dropped his hand to his side and gripped his arm instead. Nothing. He said, looking at the ground. Tamaki gazed at him for a moment, and then shrugged and started to walk away again. Wait. Krona exclaimed, and Tamaki glanced back to find the boy staring at him seriously. Thank you, Krona said quietly. When Tamaki smiled questioningly, he elaborated. For caring about me, I mean. No one's ever really done that before. Ah, Mon Ami, you don't have to thank me. Tamaki laughed. As I said before, I'm here for you from here on out. Thank you anyway, Tamaki. A weight felt like it had been lifted off of Krona's shoulders as what Tamaki was saying finally sunk in. There was at least one person in Krona's lonely world that cared about him. It was a wonderful feeling. Slowly, Krona's mouth turned up in a smile. It was small, but when Tamaki saw it, he clapped his hands together and grinned even wider, knowing that this was Krona's rare, true smile. Just then, the boys heard light footsteps bounding up the stairs, followed by heavier, clanking ones. Tamaki turned to the doorway for just a moment, but when he looked back at Krona, the smile was gone, having been replaced by the boy's normal, slightly terrified look. There you guys are, Ed said, grinning as he entered the room, followed closely by Alphonse. Hello, Ed, Al. Tamaki said, his expression instantly brightening, and Krona had to once again admire how quickly Tamaki could hide his negative emotions. Sup, Krona? Ed said, giving Krona a quick wave. Oh, nothing. The pink-haired boy said quietly, looking down at the floor. You two are back a lot earlier than I expected, Tamaki commented. Did you find out any information you were looking for? Edward's shoulders sagged, and Alphonse shook his head. No, the suit of armor sighed. We asked everyone we could, but no one recognized the symbol, or had seen any suspicious people walking around that could have been a homunculi. What were you two looking for exactly? Krona asked tentatively, not sure if they would want to tell him. Ed and Al glanced at each other for a second, debating how much to tell him, and then Ed shrugged and pulled a note card out of his pocket. We might as well fill him in, the alchemist said, walking over to Krona and holding out the card. I found this note on my pillow last night. Apparently, someone snuck through my window and put it there. Pure soul. Krona squeaked, reading the note. He let out a gasp of surprise when he saw the symbol at the bottom. It was the same one that had been tattooed on Lust's chest. Oh, Krona, Ragnarok said in a sing-song voice, surfacing in the back of Krona's mind. Krona flinched when Ragnarok's tone turned threatening. You'd better not open your damn mouth anymore, you got that? You already said too much during your little cry fest earlier. For some reason, I couldn't get through to you to make you shut up. Yes, Ragnarok, Krona said quietly, staring at the floor again. And don't say my name aloud when there's people around, you damn idiot. The demon sword hissed, making Krona wince again. Are you feeling okay, Krona? Alphonse asked when the boy kept wincing. Krona stared at him with wide eyes and nodded slowly. Yeah. I'm fine. His gaze flickered to the card again. What's this symbol at the bottom? It's the symbol of a homunculus, Ed informed him. When Krona frowned questioningly, he elaborated. An artificial human, aka a being created when someone tries to use alchemy to bring people back from the dead. Back from the dead? Krona echoed, his forlorn eyes wide. You can do that? Well, not really, Ed confessed, looking down at the floor. Tamaki put a reassuring hand on Ed's shoulder and Alphonse stepped in for the explanation, knowing that his brother didn't feel like talking about it again. You can't actually bring anyone back, the suit of armor explained solemnly. There are lots of people who've tried to bring their loved ones back, but it never works. Sure, you can get all the ingredients that make up a human being easily enough, but the one thing you can't get back is the person's soul. Without their soul, a person is basically nothing. Oh, was all Krona said as he digested this information. If Lust was a homunculus, then that meant she had basically been brought back from the dead. Krona shivered as he thought about who in the world would try to bring someone back to life, knowing that it wasn't possible. All right, it's getting way too gloomy in here, Ed announced suddenly, startling Krona. Ed grinned and clapped the shy boy on the shoulder. So, you wanted to know how to make a transmutation circle, huh? Well, let's go outside and we'll show you, okay? Krona nodded and he, Tamaki, and Alphonse followed Ed through the house and out to the driveway, where Ed and Al proceeded to explain the mechanics of drawing a transmutation circle. After about 45 minutes, Krona had gotten the basic circle down, and told the boys that he had to get home. Al drew a copy of the circle on a sheet of paper for Krona to look off of when he tried it at home, and they sent the boy on his way. As Ed and Al headed back into the house, Krona heard someone running behind him and turned to see Tamaki waving for him to stop. Is there something wrong, Tamaki? Krona asked once Tamaki had caught up. The blonde was about to shake his head, but then he paused. Listen, Krona, please don't hesitate to call me if there's any trouble, he said, putting his hands on Krona's shoulders again. The concern was obvious in his violet eyes, and Krona gripped his arm and stared at the ground, once again feeling a pang of remorse at what he'd revealed earlier. Okay, he said quietly, and Tamaki wished he could do more for this poor child, wished he could just take him away from the home that was obviously causing him so much pain. But the blonde knew he couldn't. All he could do was give Krona's shoulder one last reassuring squeeze and send him on his way, hoping that Krona would take his advice and ask for help soon. Tamaki would just have to keep an eye on him until then. Krona felt Tamaki's eyes on his back all the way down the driveway. He gripped the drawing of the transmutation circle tighter, wishing that he could tell Tamaki everything but knowing that he couldn't. Ragnarok wouldn't tell Medusa what Krona had revealed already, Krona knew, because then the demon sword would be punished as well. But, if Krona let anything else slip, then Tamaki might tell his father, which would mean he would be repeating what Krona had said straight to Medusa's face. And if Medusa found out what Tamaki knew, then the blonde might be hurt as well. Krona paused in the middle of the sidewalk, a slight frown crossing his face. Why did he just think that? Why was he concerned whether Tamaki got hurt or not? Just because Tamaki said he was his friend didn't mean that much. Did it? I mean, yes, it felt nice to hear that he cares about me, Krona thought, recalling how Tamaki had actually made him smile and genuinely, at that. But I really shouldn't be making friends, I'll just have to leave them sooner or later. He heaved a sigh. It seemed that no matter what he did, anyone he came across either got left behind as Medusa's plans moved on, or ended up dead. Krona shivered. At least he hadn't been ordered to kill anyone so he could feed their souls to Ragnarok. Yet. Oh, I hope we move on before that happens, Krona thought, starting to walk again. He really had no desire to use his weapon anytime soon, let alone murder anyone in this innocent little town. He shook his head to clear away these depressing thoughts and instead tried to focus on his next task, drawing a transmutation circle for Medusa and showing her that he could do alchemy. He uncrumpled the drawing Alphonse had given him and studied it all the way to his temporary house. When he got to the door he paused for a moment to brace himself, and then he turned the doorknob and stepped inside. This had better work, Krona, Medusa snapped, a slight frown creasing her lips. She was watching her son as he put the last few finishing touches on the transmutation circle. They were standing in the living room, having moved the rugs and furniture to reveal the hardwood floor underneath. Yes, Lady Medusa, it will, Krona said. He placed the chalk he had been drawing with on the ground, and then he winced as Ragnarok appeared out of his back. You'd better not mess this up, idiot. The demon sword sneered, poking Krona in the cheek. Ragnarok, don't distract him, Medusa said, and Ragnarok immediately let go of Krona to stare at her. Remember, you assured me that he could do this, so if he's lying then that means you're lying, too. And you know I don't take kindly to liars. Sorry, Lady Medusa. Ragnarok said quickly, and then, after giving Krona one last pinch on the cheek, he disappeared into his meister's back. Medusa stepped away from the transmutation circle and clasped her hands behind her back, gazing at Krona. All right, show me, she commanded. Krona gulped, nodded, and turned to the transmutation circle. With sweaty hands, he placed the chunk of wood he'd picked up outside in the center of the circle. He took a deep breath, trying unsuccessfully to calm his nerves, and put his hands on the edge of the circle. He stared hard at the block of wood and envisioned it turning into a dog like before, putting all his energy into that image. Nothing happened for a few seconds, and Krona started to panic. What if he'd been wrong? What if he couldn't do alchemy anymore? Medusa would be so angry. Just then, a bright light burst forth from beneath Krona's hands. Medusa stared, transfixed, as the light traveled throughout the circle and engulfed the block of wood. After a moment, the light dispersed, leaving a little wooden dog in the chunk of wood's place. Medusa rushed over and grabbed the dog, scrutinizing all of its details. Krona sat back and gripped his arm, hoping that the dog would meet Medusa's approval. "Very good, Krona," Medusa said, a slow grin spreading across her face. Krona let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding in a huge sigh of relief. He looked up at Medusa, who turned towards him. "This will make our plan much easier," she commented. "We practically don't even need those Elric brothers anymore. You can make the transmutation circle for the pure soul. Now we just need to find it." Lady Medusa," Krona said tentatively, and Medusa glanced at him. "What exactly am I going to have to do?" "I'll tell you that later," the witch replied. She smiled and placed a hand on Krona's shoulder, making the boy stiffen. "But I do have some other news. Lust and I have figured out a way to find the pure soul." "Really?" Krona asked, surprised, and Medusa nodded. "Lust and I combined all of our information on the pure soul and the Philosopher's Stone and came up with a potion that, if consumed, will give a clear indication of who the pure soul is. Of course, we're not going to be able to test it beforehand, so we have to hope it works. And that's where you come in." Krona gripped his arm nervously, wondering what he'd have to do. Medusa moved in front of him and crouched down so she could look into his face. "Now listen very carefully, Krona," she instructed, and Krona did his best not to avert his gaze to the floor. "Once I get this potion made, it's going to be your job to make sure that everyone in that host club of yours drinks it. If no one in that club turns out to be the pure soul, then you'll just have to try and give it to the rest of the school. But just stick to the host club for now. Do you understand, Krona?" "Yes, Lady Medusa," Krona said, and then he frowned slightly. "But, how am I supposed to know who the pure soul is?" "The potion will have a bitter taste to everyone but the pure soul," Medusa explained. "The person who doesn't immediately spit it out is the person you're looking for." "Okay," Krona said, making a mental note of this fact. "However, we'll still need a few days to actually make the potion. Lust is out gathering the ingredients now so you'll have to wait a little longer before you can give it out." Krona nodded and then flinched as Medusa stood up suddenly. The witch narrowed her eyes at him. "Make sure not to do anything that would blow our cover," she said, and Krona blanched. "She knows," he thought. "She somehow found out what I told Tamaki." His breathing sped up and his heart started pounding as he tried to guess what Medusa was going to do to him. "You're acting jumpier than usual," Medusa remarked, and Krona tried to brace himself for his punishment. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it pointedly. "I just wanted to make sure you're being careful, don't mess this up." And with that, she turned and walked towards the door. Krona stared after her, confused. "I'll come by again tomorrow," Medusa said as she turned the doorknob. Without giving Krona a second glance, she exited the house and slammed the door behind her. Krona gazed at the closed door for a few seconds, bewildered. Maybe Medusa hadn't realized what he'd told Tamaki. "Well, that was a lucky break," Ragnarok commented, forming out of Krona's back and leaning on his Meister's head. "I thought she knew what I'd said to Tamaki," Krona said, feeling slightly relieved. "She was suspicious, that's for sure." Ragnarok put his fists on both sides of Krona's head and squeezed. "You're such an idiot. I can't believe you let your feelings slip out like that. If that blonde idiot tells his dad, we're dead meat." "He won't, he told me he wouldn't," Krona exclaimed, trying vainly to push Ragnarok's hands away. The demon sword laughed scornfully. "He told me he wouldn't," he repeated mockingly. He grabbed Krona's hair and tugged the boy's head back, eliciting a whine of pain. "You'd better hope this guy is as much of a saint as you say he is, because I don't feel like getting punished because you put too much trust in someone." "Ow, stop it, Ragnarok!" Krona cried. The demon sword continued to grip his hair for a few more seconds and then released him, once again disappearing into his back. Krona sniffed dejectedly, staring at the floor. He knew he shouldn't have put so much confidence into believing that Tamaki would keep his mouth shut, but for some reason he couldn't seem to find any doubt in what Tamaki had told him. If the host king said he wouldn't reveal Krona's secret feelings, then Krona had every confidence that the blonde would stick to his word. Krona sighed and stood up. He grabbed the edge of the rug that had haphazardly been pushed to the side and pulled it over the transmutation circle, all the while wondering who the pure soul would turn out to be. Check the description for the links to the author.